Hi, I'm Jill Wiseman. Welcome to the Parisian Lights class. This is a beginner level bracelet that even experienced beaders will really love because it's very versatile and it's something that becomes everybody's favorite project to make. You can make it in about 2 to 3 hours the first time that you make it. After that, it's going to take even less time. And depending on what beads you pick, you can make it look very, very different. This one happens to be a very dressy kind of look. I also did a version that is kind of fun and funky, a little bit younger looking. We also have a version that has more of a Victorian flair to it. You don't have to be stuck with just the crystals even. Use gemstone beads, use pearls. You're going to find this to be one of your very favorite projects. Here are the tools that you're going to need for this project. You need your needles. You can use either size 10 or size 12 needles for this. I usually try to use a size 10 because it has a larger eye and it's a little easier to thread your needle. But if you're starting to have trouble getting your needle and thread through any of the beads, you can switch down to a size 12 needle and it'll move through there more easily. You need some type of scissors to cut your thread. I like to use these little pearl shears, but you can use a Fisker's scissors or really any kind of scissors that'll cut your thread. A tape measure to help you measure and make sure that you're making your bracelet the right length for you. And then if you do run into trouble with getting your needle and thread through any of those tight spots, you can use a flat nose pliers to grab the end of your needle and pull it on through. It gives you a little bit of extra strength. The materials you're going to need for this bracelet are 4mm BICONE crystals, 6mm crystal rounds, a size 11 seed beads, and you'll need one 8mm crystal to use as your clasp. One of the great things about this bracelet is that you can accommodate some other choices other than just the crystals. As long as you're using a 4mm bead and a 6mm bead, you could use pearls or you could use gemstone beads. I've seen both variations and they're quite lovely. If you're using the size 11 seed beads, you'll want to stick with a 4mm and a 6mm size in your beads. If you decide to get a little more advanced, you could use a size 15 seed bead, and then you could downsize your 4mm to a 3mm bead and your 6mm to a 4mm bead. You may have to play around with counts just a little bit, but it should be a fairly easy transition. You have several different options for thread with this project. Fireline is something that a lot of people are using these days. I use the 6-pound test for this. Wildfire is also another option. It's very similar to the Fireline. You're going to want to use the .006 diameter on that. And then you always can use a thread. This happens to be NYMO, but you could also use S-lon or C-lon. You're going to want to use the D thread width. Wildfire comes in 3 different colors. They're opaque. It's an opaque black, an opaque white, and a nice opaque forest green. Your Fireline has a smoke color and then a white color. You'll be able to find thread in a huge variety of colors. I suggest you start out with what I call a wingspan worth of thread. That means outstretched arm to outstretched arm. Here I have my thread, which we've already cut, and I'm going to thread my needle and we're going to put on a stopper bead. So you're probably going to need to blunt the end of your thread. I just take my fingers and rub it against the edge there, which makes it nice and flat, and then you can get your needle threaded. This stopper bead we're just using as a way of keeping all of our beads from rolling off the end of our thread while we get started. So all we're going to do is pick up that stopper bead. We're going to pull it down to the end of our thread. You want to leave about a 4 to 6 inch tail. We're going to need to weave that in later. And then going from the tail end back up, we're going to go through that bead another time. And I usually kind of hold on to that tail to keep it from pulling out. You're going to notice that your thread is going to be showing on the outside of the bead here. That's totally fine. That's what we want. This is only a temporary bead that we're going to take off later. That's why I used a bead that's completely unrelated to the project, so I won't accidentally bead it in. We're ready to start our daisy chain now, which is what the center of this bracelet is. I have picked up 16 of our size 11 seed beads here, and I just brought them on down to where our stopper bead is. You're going to go again from the tail end back up through all 16 beads. Now this kind of turns them into a circle, but not really. Let me show you what I'm talking about. You end up with this little bit of thread that's still showing. See how you kind of have this little piece of thread here? You're going to keep going around the circle. So now I'm going to keep going this way, and we're going to go through another 8 beads. There's a method to my madness. Normally I would have you just go through 1 bead to turn it into a circle, but I want you to be 8 beads away from where the tail is. So there we go. And you can see that your tail thread is coming out over here and your working thread is coming out over here. We're ready to pick up our very first 6mm crystal. We're going to put it right in the center there. And here's how. It's going to sit diagonally across the center of this circle we have right here. And we're going to attach it by coming back over here where our tail thread is coming out, and we're going to needle up through 3 beads. As we do this, it's going to tighten it all up. See how that crystal just sits right in the center there. Now the other thing I want you to notice is that this crystal sits on top of the beads. It doesn't sit down in the center of that ring. Don't try to push it in and make the beads sit around it. Go ahead and let it sit on top. And later on, if you have trouble and some of your crystals are sitting on one side and some of them are sitting on the other, you can actually manually pop that through. You just want all those crystals to sit on the same side. Now we're going to go ahead and add the next circle in our little daisy chain, and where we picked up 16 beads before, we're only going to pick up 13 beads this time. The reason is these 3 beads right here on the edge that we went through, they're going to be shared with the next circle. So this time it's just picking up 13 seed beads. And once you have those on your needle, you're going to go from that bottom edge. Notice how your working thread's coming out the top. You're going to go in the bottom of those 3 seed beads one more time. My thread's trying to tangle a little bit here, so I'm going to catch that and get that all untangled before I actually try to force it through the bead, because if I do that, we're going to have a big ol' mess on our hands. We don't like knots. You can use your needle to kind of pull all that out. I'll finish pulling that through. And there we have our second set of seed beads. So now we've got to put that crystal in the center. Now it's not quite as easy to tell where the 3 seed beads over here on the side are, because you don't have the tail showing you where they are. So what you need to do is you're going to count 5 seed beads across the bottom. So you've got, we're not counting these 3 that we used in the previous side there. We're going to count the first seed after that and go 5 over. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to needle up in through 6, 7, and 8. Now let me show you a trick that I use. I will frequently use the thread to help me count those beads. So that means I will use that as kind of a marker place as I'm going along. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then that helps me figure out where that needle goes. It's going to go right above where the thread is. Okay? So go ahead and pull on through. let that crystal sit right there in the center. One thing I want to show you is that you want to kind of be keeping an eye out to make sure that these beads are all sitting on the same diagonal, because you can see the hole a little bit through the crystal, and it's going to drive you crazy, and you're going to notice it if you end up with one bead on a diagonal this way and you've made a mistake and there's a bead on the diagonal this way. So just keep that in mind as you're going along, that periodically just double check to make sure that all of those are on the same path. We're going to add another daisy chain here. So we've got 13 beads to pick up. I've got my 13 beads on, and again I'm going into the bottom of that set of 3 beads there. Voila. And then ready to add another crystal. I'll get it on my needle. And then I can use either my thread or my needle to help me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beads, and I need to go up through the next 3. Now here's a good example of it all kind of pulled apart when I was pulling it through. And most people's inclination when they go to tighten is they want to tighten this direction. They want to tighten away. But the trick with this to get it nice and tight is actually I put my finger over the crystal and I tighten inward. This is the direction that we want all those beads to sit, and that allows us to get all that extra thread out of there and makes it look nice. You're going to keep adding these daisies with the 6mm crystals in the center until you get the length that you need. And what you need is a piece that is about a 1/2 inch shorter than you want your finished bracelet to be. So in this case, I made this 6.5 inches, which means by the time I add my clasp, it's going to fit like a 7-inch bracelet. Something else I want to show you, kind of give you a little bit of the geography of this piece. When you get a little confused about where you are, you have 5 seed beads across the top on each of these, 5 seed beads across the bottom, and then you've got 3 seed beads on either side of your crystal. So that encompasses 1 unit. These 5 seed beads across the top are going to be important for our next step as we add our bicones. For this 6.5 inch length, I used 20 beads across. Now we're going to go ahead and add our clasp bead, and we can do that right where we ended off with our daisy chain down the center. You're going to pick up for your clasp 4 seed beads. You'll need a bicone next, 1 seed bead. You're going to use an 8mm bead for your clasp. It's bigger than the 6mm beads that we were using for the center, which makes for a more secure clasp for you. And then lastly, we need 3 more seed beads, and those are going to help keep that clasp bead on. So at that point, once you've got all that length strung on, you're going to skip these last 3 seed beads that you added and go back through the 8mm crystal, a single seed bead, the bicone, and 1 seed bead passed. So those are the beads that you're actually needling through. And you'll go ahead and pull all that through. You'll notice as you pull down, those 3 seed beads on the end make a pretty little picot. And you want to go ahead and tighten it all up so that you don't have the thread showing. We need to create 1 more little leg to attach to the end of our bracelet here. So we went back through the first seed bead, and now I'm going to pick up 3 more seed beads to match the other side. Remember how we've got the 5 seed beads on either edge? So we want to go back through these 3 seed beads on the end. Now you want to make sure that you're leaving 5 across the top and 5 across the bottom. It can be easy to accidentally go through these 3 seed beads here, and then your clasp is way off to the side. So we'll go ahead and go through those 3 seed beads and pull. And that makes the nice little attachment for our clasp. Now we're ready to move on to our next step with this bracelet, which is going to be adding the BICONE crystals. We're going to be doing that by going from the center of this set of 5 to the center of the next set of 5. So to get ourselves in position, you're going to keep going through 3 seed beads around the daisy. That brings us out of that 3rd seed bead in this set of 5. You'll pick up 1 seed bead, 1 BICONE crystal, and 1 seed bead. You're going to needle through the 3rd seed bead, so just through that 3rd seed bead there in the next set of 5 across. And that just pops into place perfectly right there. And you'll do that all the way along this length of your bracelet. So it's seed bead, BICONE crystal, and seed bead. And then you're catching that 3rd seed bead on the next set of 5. So you pick up a seed bead, a BICONE crystal, and a seed bead, and then you're going to needle through that 3rd bead of the next set of 5 and pop. One thing to be aware of as you're adding these bicones is your tension. You want to go ahead and pull so that you don't have a whole bunch of thread showing, but you don't want to kind of go crazy and pull really hard and tighten it up so that it gets really stiff. So you'll notice that I just pull enough so that I don't have any thread showing. I don't want it to be so loose that we've got all sorts of gappiness going on. I want it to fit in there nicely, but I also don't want to pull super, super tight, because that way the bracelet won't have a whole lot of movement. I've gotten all of my bicones across the edge here, and I've also gone ahead and taken off that stopper bead from my tail thread. Our next step is going to be adding the loop end of our clasps to go around our big bead there. From where we ended when we added that last bicone bead, you're going to want to go through 6 seed beads around this edge. So we're just, without adding anything in, we're just going to needle through 6 beads. Because you're going around an edge, you're probably going to need to needle through 3 beads and then 3 beads. You can't really necessarily get all 6 in one stitch. So that puts us in position now to add the loop end of our clasp. You'll start by adding 4 seed beads, a bicone crystal, and then you're going to want to pick up roughly 22 seed beads. Now the reason I say roughly is because not all seed beads are the same size, even though they are called size 11. Depending on your manufacturer, they can be fat or skinny, so 22 gives you a rough estimate, but I'm going to show you here in a second how you're going to double check that before you go any farther. What you'll do is needle back through the first seed bead that you put on in that set of 22, the bicone crystal, and 1 more seed bead. And you're going to go ahead and pull that all tight. Then what I like to do is hold that with my finger, so that's our loop size, but we haven't really gone too far past that. This gives us the chance while we're holding that to check it and make sure that it fits nicely around your crystal. Mine works just perfectly fine, so I'm going to keep going. At that point, I need to create that other little leg here, so we'll pick up 3 more seed beads. And then like we did before, we're going to make sure that we're centering this loop on the end of our last daisy. And we're going to go in through those last 3 seed beads there, leaving 5 seed beads across the top and 5 seed beads across the bottom. And pull on through. That creates our beautiful little loop. Once you've added this loop end, we're going to now add the bicones on the second half of your bracelet. So you're just going to needle through your 3 beads here on the side to get yourself in position. That has you coming out the middle of the set of 5. And then you're going to pick up your seed bead and your bicone crystal and your seed bead. Needle through the middle of the next set. And seed bead, bicone, and seed bead, and you'll needle through the middle of the next set. At some point you are going to end up having to add thread, most likely. So I leave myself about a 4 to 6 inch length, and then at that point go ahead and end off this thread. I don't want to leave it too short, because at that point, if it's really short, you're going to have a lot of trouble doing it. So what I'd like to do is, on this particular project, I tie knots. And I don't like to tie those knots right on these outside edges where I'm still having to needle through the seed beads, because I don't want a knot blocking my access to the inside of a seed bead. So that means I'm going to move this thread over to here. I'm moving 2 seed beads over so that I can make this knot right along this inside edge of the crystal here. It's all going to be hidden in here, in this inside edge, and that way it's out of my way. So what I do to create that knot is I just catch the thread that's already attaching the crystal with my needle. I pull down until I have a small loop of thread left. I like it to be small because the bigger that loop is, the more likely you are to create a knot that is not in the right spot and nicely hidden. So make it nice and small, and then you're going to take your needle and just pop it through that loop, and then you'll close down that knot slowly so that it tightens right in that intersection. I like to tie at least 2 knots when I'm doing this, so I'm going to actually go through the crystal with this thread. Now I'm on the opposite side, but still right next to the crystal. I'm catching that thread that's already there, needling under, pulling down so I've got a small little loop, going through the loop, and then pulling that down slowly right so that it hides next to or into the bead. I never like to cut my thread off right next to a knot, so I'm going to go ahead and move my thread away from that last knot. Doesn't matter where you go, there's no exact science to this. I just happened to decide to go down 3 beads here, and then at that point I can cut this thread off securely. So I would just hold some tension on it, get my scissors down in there, and cut that extra thread off. Your tail thread is still hanging out here from when we started the project, and you can end your tail thread off at any time the same way. Next, we have to add a new length of thread. Once you've cut off a new length of thread and threaded your needle, you're going to be ready to attach it to your bracelet. And you're going to do it the same way you ended the thread, you're just going to do it in reverse. So I'm going to run it through a bead or a set of beads, and then tie a knot, move it to another spot, tie another knot, and then we're going to be ready to get it in place to continue adding our bicones. I know that I want my thread to end up coming out of this bead over here so that I can continue adding the bicones. So I'm actually going to start adding my thread over on this side and work my way over there. I'll do that by going through a couple of seed beads here. I leave a little bit of tail to hold on to just to give me some leverage to keep me from pulling it out before I make my first knot. I'm right next to this edge right here, so I'm going to needle under that thread, pull down so I have a little loop, needle through the loop, and then tighten slowly so that it all disappears. I'll move on over here. I'm moving over to the next intersection over here. We'll catch that thread, pull down so we've got the little loop, needle through the loop, and then pull down slowly into that intersection. Now I can get my thread right over here where I need to be coming out that third seed bead of the set of 5. So I've moved my needle now and thread coming out of that third seed bead of the set of 5, and I'm ready to start adding my bicones again. Here I've finished adding all the crystals, the bicone crystals on the second side. But we're not done yet. We're going to add another extra little edge. But first, before we get back to adding anything more, I want to go up, since we're up here where we added this crystal for your clasp, we want to go through here and reinforce all of this. Your clasp is the point of most wear and tear on your bracelet, and if anything breaks, that's going to be the first thing to go. So having an extra pass of thread through there is a good thing. This means we're going to go through all of these beads again. We're not adding any beads, we're just following the same thread path that we did before. So it's just a matter of needling through, and you can twist and turn this however you need to give you the best access to get inside those beads. I'm going to go all the way back up through these at the tip. You'll notice I got a little knot right there in my thread. Those guys are kind of notorious for being easy to get out because all you have to do is pull that loop and it'll pop out. So that's the best kind of knot to have if there's a good kind. You're going to needle through all of these little picot beads. Back down through the crystal. Through here. And then back down through the second leg. Make sure as you're doing this that you don't catch your thread around the crystal. That's something that's very easy to do and not catch, because then you're going to have that thread showing. So make sure that when it comes down, you get it all inside the beads. So now we are ready to move on to add the picot edging. Where we want to be to add the picot edging is we're going to add just a single bead right here in the intersection of these 3 seed beads in between each of the bicones. So we need to get over there, and that just means we're going to travel through these beads, through your seed bead, your bicone, and your seed bead, and then we're actually going to travel past this little intersection of 3, which means we're going to also go through this seed bead and this seed bead. So it's going through all 3 of those. Then we're going to be ready to add our picot. This is also a good thing to do because it adds one more pass of thread through those BICONE crystals. Crystals are notorious little thread cutters. So if you're able to get an extra pass of thread through a crystal, that's always a good thing. Gives you a little more security. Okay, so now we're ready to add a seed bead. So you're just picking up one seed bead, and we're going to loop around these 3 seed beads. So what we're doing is we picked up that seed bead, and then we're going to go through all 3 of those again. And that single seed bead that we picked up is just going to pop right into place. And it's just an added decorative touch. And it just makes it looks much more finished than it does over here, you'll notice. So again, we are just traveling through all 3 of those seed beads. Picking up one bead and then traveling through all 3 of those seed beads again. Because they're of the positions they're in, you'll probably have to do it in 2 stitches, the way I'm having to. And since I know I'm actually going to be moving to the next intersection of 3, I usually travel it through that crystal too. We've gone ahead and finished the entire picot down this edge. We're back down to our loop end now, so we're going to go ahead and reinforce that whole section too, because it's part of the clasp and we want to get that second pass of thread through there. So again, this is just putting your needle and thread through there. We're not adding any beads at this point, just reinforcement. This does tighten up the loop ever so slightly, but you want your clasp to be nice and secure, so erring on the side of just a smidge tight or difficult to put on is probably better than having it too loose. This was the side that we did the picot on, so I know that this is the side of the bracelet that I need to get to. It's trying to loop around my loop. I'll keep it from doing that. So now that we've finished reinforcing that whole loop area, we're going to get back over here and get in position to add our set of picots down the other edge of the bracelet. So it's just a matter of traveling over there, going through those 3 seed beads, picking up a seed bead, and then traveling through those 3 seed beads again. Getting yourself in position to add the next picot. So you'll add your picots down this entire side as well. Once you've finished adding your picot all the way down that second side, you can end your thread off the same way we did when we were adding and ending thread before. And guess what? Your bracelet is ready to wear. I made this little sample here to show you how to fix a couple of problems that commonly pop up. You're going to notice that compared to our finished bracelet here, this clasp is off at an odd angle. That's because when I added it way off to the 3 beads above the center 6mm crystal instead of adding it to the 3 beads on the side. So before you go too far away from adding your crystal bead, stop, take a look at it, make sure that it's nice and straight, and if it's not, you're going to need to pull that back out and redo it and get it in those right 3 seed beads on the edge. If you're pulling out any of your stitches to fix anything, make sure that you take your thread off the needle first, because if you try to back out by using your needle, you could split your thread or break it, or even just create a knot, and it's going to get you in a bad situation. The other common things that happen is if you miscounted when you were creating those early daisy chains, or if you happen to hit just maybe not the right 3 beads, what can happen is you'll end up with 6 beads on an edge or 4 beads on an edge instead of 5. So then the question is, I need to go through the middle bead. There is no middle bead. What do I do? Here's what you're going to do. With a mistake where you've got 6 beads in there, you're going to use 2 beads in the center as if it were a middle bead. It's just the middle 2 beads instead of 1. So in this case, I will needle over through 4 beads and consider these 2 as my middle bead. I'll pick up my seed bead, my bicone, and my seed bead and move to the next spot. But look, I have a problem over here because now I've only got 4 seed beads in this next spot. In this case, you're literally just going to have to pick one. It's going to be a little tiny smudge off center, but somebody has to be looking really closely to see it, and my rule is if they're looking that closely, they're invading your personal space and they need to back up. So by doing that and then adding your next bicone, your seed bead, your bicone, and your seed bead, and going through the middle of the next one, you'll notice that you can barely even tell that there's a difference there. So you would literally have to get in here and count the seed beads to be aware that there's a problem. So just go ahead and fudge it. Thanks so much for taking this class with me. I hope you had a really good time making the bracelet and that you'll make many more in the future. For questions, if you have any or have run into trouble, please email us at classes@beaducation.com and we'll be happy to help you out with those. Thanks so much, and I hope to see you at another class soon.